That's why you see it. Okay. All right. As we take our seats, I will say that it's been such a fascinating conversation before the break, and we look forward to carry that on now for the remainder of our discussion. What I do want to say is on the web, it's been very clear we have a group of perspectives here in person that are shared, and those might not be shared by folks who are on the web. So I will encourage the folks on the web, if you have a brief comment about something that you've heard today or something that you think your experience or your perspective is much different than what you've heard expressed here by the folks in the room, then I encourage you to submit those comments, and we will do our best to review those. And even if we don't review them, we will have them, and we will read that, and it will be included as part of the public record as well. Okay? So now we're going to turn to, we've alluded to this, and we've touched upon it some. But we want to now talk about informed consent, and I have a feeling that the discussions is going to be broader than just the questions that are up on the screen. So the questions that we do have up are really about how should informed consent clearly communicate the purpose of a study, especially when it's not directly it's in the early stages perhaps. How the informed consent should clearly communicate the potential benefits, and we talked about what we perceive those benefits to be, and how should it communicate the potential risks, and that includes the uncertainty about the risks. So in the cases where it's really unclear, it's uncertain what those risks are. And other information that you would find helpful when deciding whether to enter an HIV cure research study. And for those of you who have participated in the study, perhaps we can do is focus on things that you haven't, information that you haven't yet seen in your experiences. What kind of new information would you get if you're already familiar with those consent procedures? And I think we also want to ask a question, so maybe the panelists, if you have some thoughts as we go through, as we make our opening remarks, about how we reach people and make sure that the communications are reaching the range of folks who may be considering participating in a research trial, even if those perspectives may not be fully reflected here today. So you can comment on that, and then I think Dr. Goldkind will probably also have some other follow-up questions to ask. She's been instrumental in helping us shape this portion of the day. So with that, I'm done talking. We'll have the same format. We're probably, of course, a little bit behind schedule, but that's okay. We're going to have a full discussion. We'll get out of here on time. So if you could I think maybe we'll start down the row, and we'll start with Matt to address these questions, and we'll open up for the full discussion.
Thank you. So I guess I want to start out by saying that we've been talking about informed consent and the informed consent process for so long, and we've been trying to explain it and trying to make it an easier involvement with the people that we train and teach and talk to. And so I don't think none of that's changed. It's the same issues. What's changed is the science and the technology. And so those are differences there that we need to remember. This is not a new thing. We've been doing this a long time. And one of the main things that I think is so important in an informed consent is the word process and is the word counseling. Why can't we make this a counseling effort that really goes in depth with these protocols? And I know there's issues with time and who's going to do it, but all of those things could be worked out later. But I love the idea of, especially with the new technology that exists out there. I know there are new startup companies using tablet technology for informed consents. Other ways of using of implementing informed consent rather than just a paper document that often the words are too big and nobody wants to read it. I mean, I honestly, after you get a fifth revision of a protocol, often I don't even read it. So there's a lot of new technology. More time needs to be taken. And I was going to say, testing. Testing the individual after an informed consent is performed, and just a simple test to see if they really understood what they're reading. Those are some ideas.
Thanks, Matt.
So I've been thinking a lot about this, and I even have mentioned some of this, so I won't go into a lot of detail here. But I think informed consent is it's a large process, and it's more than just a form that you sign. And I think we really need to be thinking that that's really sort of the last thing that probably happens, that there should be a lot of other discussion. I think Matt's suggestion about a counselor, or even if it's your provider, I can't imagine any of our providers sitting down with us and going over an informed consent about all the risks and benefits about a potential trial for 30 minutes or 45 minutes. What provider is going to have the time to do that and take the time to do that? But the more resources that can be provided as part of that informed consent process, I think would help clearly communicate what the purpose is. And then also talking about the potential benefits as well as the potential risks. I think as much as possible to quantify things in terms of this is very likely, or it's unknown completely, we have no idea, or there's a slight likelihood, or in rare instances, if it can be as descriptive as possible about what is known based on previous trials or previous studies that have been done, I think the better. But I guess the last thing related to it is that we can't underestimate the power of working in the community through this process. And you asked the question at the very end, how do we, get this outward? And I think we're not the representative folks. We're not the ones that need to be a part of any kind of these studies. I mean, we may need to be as well, but we really need to be thinking much broader, and that's a challenge. And I don't think any of us have the answer to how we outreach into the community, because if we did, we wouldn't have 20% of our HIV-infected population in this country that don't even know their status. So there's some real challenges with that, but it's a critical piece that we need to be focusing on as well.
Thank you, Murray.
Yeah, I think Murray hit it on the head when he talked about, outreach to community, because we're fooling ourselves if we think that, any document or any process, no matter how involved, is going to fully provide informed consent for something that's complicated. The reason you can provide informed consent for the standard, what's the next 3-in-1 combo pill is because people understand, the process, the science, they know what they're getting into because they're familiar with it. This is completely uncharted territory for the patients, certainly, and often for the researchers. So I think we need to step back and look at the much bigger picture and realize we need to start educating the entire community. I think all stakeholders, regulatory, the new Delaney Collaboratories, pharma, need to collaborate with community leaders to go out and educate the community about the research as it's happening. So we're bringing people up to speed, in real time, because this is going to be a lengthy process of years if we're really going to let people know what's going on and what they're getting into. And so I think this could include the development of robust community advisory boards and the Delaney Collaboratories in the communities where the first studies will be taking place. Public forums by those CABs and collaboratories to educate their communities, well-written, and the emphasis on well-written and not sensationalized or hype stories in the press about what's happening and what it means, webinars, and especially, and I think Alex referred to this earlier, targeting the education of the underserved communities, such as the African American community and women, in conjunction with groups like the Black AIDS Institute that have done really good work in educating their communities and bringing up community leaders to ensure that study participation is open and understood by those communities to avoid the usual skewed demographics that we've been talking about today. So this will take time and resources, but I think we need to start now so we can ensure that the community is well educated and able to provide the consent so that when we do sit down with them with a possibly long piece of paper and a counselor and a follow-up test, that they're going to have the background to actually comprehend it and provide that informed consent.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said so far. But, first, I think it's important to keep in mind that investigators have a rather perverse incentive when it comes to informed consent. They're driven by cost and by resources and by time. And I know for a fact that there have been complaints in at least one of the research networks by the investigators for having to do testing of informed consent because it takes so much time and it takes so much personnel. And that's a short, simple test that they do. So I think, so that's important to keep in mind. That said, I think that there are some things that we can do. I think in devising the consent process, we can actually test the process before we test the people who are consented. You can have a provider go out to a local community-based organization. You can pay participants $20, $25 to show up. You can have them do their spiel. You can do a sample consent form, and then you can test the participants to see how understandable it is before you ever field the process. And businesses do this kind of stuff all the time, so I think we can learn from them. I think also video technology has gotten so much cheaper, and I think that sometimes people really learn better from watching a video, particularly when we're describing complex processes that are very difficult to imagine if you don't understand the underlying biology. I think something else that's important to do that's a little bit different than I see sometimes in the consent forms that I'm asked to review is that when you're describing the potential benefit of some of these very early studies and you're talking about the research goal. So for instance, I'll give a very specific example. When you're talking about HDAC inhibitors, and they might describe that an HDAC inhibitor, we hope, will wake up latent virus, therefore perhaps making it more susceptible to the body for destruction. Now, that's the research goal that's described, but I think what often doesn't end up happening is a little bit further information that perhaps we think people are too dumb to understand. And that's to explain the fact that we don't even know how much you have to wake up the virus. So there's a sort of additional information that I hope we don't oversimplify, because I think that's really important for people to know. That's it.
Thank you, David. Linda?
So everybody's been great and said a lot of good things. Informed consent is like a legal term of art, and I think it has left the patients behind. I think that when you look at an informed consent form, it's this long, and it has nothing to do with protecting the patients anymore. I mean, I really believe that. I think it's about making sure that people don't get sued and that IRBs are protected and that the institution is also protected. And the patients have gotten lost in this, I think. I think investigators are too busy When's the last time? I've never seen know of an investigator except some individual docs, but from an institution that sits down and talks to the patient and what goes through the form. I mean, you're lucky if their phone number's on it. You know, that page is usually empty, you know, anyway. But I mean, I really think it behooves us to get people educated and to learn about what things are happening and what things mean. And I think that, you know, how can you clearly communicate, let's see, the purpose of the study, or there's one that's benefit. How can you communicate potential benefit? Well, it should be the other way around. How can you be sure to communicate that there's no benefit there, you know, and that people get that? And we can educate everybody in the world, but then there'll be somebody that comes in that hasn't been to one of our things. Do you know what I mean? That isn't aware of any of this stuff. So you've got an investigator who really wants to get the study enrolled and get those bodies in there so we can get his study finished. You've got some that have even more, you know, more wrong motives than that, I guess. But so what is it that we do? I mean, it's funny, I just finished a trial at Hopkins, and I was interested to hear what my friend in the audience said about what her experience was. Now, I don't know if it was because it was me, and they all know me there, that the nurse sat down with me till she got on my nerves. You know what I mean? Okay, this. But that's what you need to do with people. You need to sit there with them individually. Some people will need to take it home and discuss it with their family. Other people were like me, like, okay, I understand this. You know, where do I sign? But, you know, just like there are people that will do things and won't do things, there are people that know what this stuff means, and there are people that don't. So we have to be able to try and get things as much individualized as possible. And I think a good way to start that is to have a good study nurse that's going to take time with people to really know that they get it. I mean, you know, I think the video technology that David talked about is really helpful. I think it's really helpful, too, to videotape the nurse to make sure she's asking the right questions to people. You know, I don't know how that would be for privacy concerns, if people want to be on tape, you know. But, I mean, really, I think that nobody is better to get this stuff done than the great research nurses that are out there that are used to taking time with patients, that are ones that make sure that you come in and that you stay enrolled and that you're doing what you're supposed to. I mean, they're like, you know, women run the world, right? Most of them are women. A lot of them are men, but I mean, I think that that's a joke. I'm just joking here with that. But, you know, I mean, I think somebody's got to take time with people individually to make sure that they get it, you know.
Thank you very much. I want to pick up before I ask my colleagues to see if they have any questions. And I think instead of doing that, I think we'll open it up for the whole discussion so that everyone can do that. But I was struck, David, you presented a really concrete thing about was it the length of, did someone mention length of time that the study was going to be going? David, you presented something. My notes have lost me. A concrete piece of information that you would want to see communicated in the informed consent. And I was wondering if you could each go through and talk about something concrete, description of something, or it was how much is needed to activate the load. Okay, I got it. So if you could go through as I make my way to the front and give an example of something you'd really concretely like to see included and be clearly communicated in informed consent. And I'll go to the front. So don't all fight over.
Well, you know, adults learn in different ways. So, you know, you go back to the adult learning model. There, you know, use of new technology, different technologies, drawings. I mean, it may sound silly, but some people can get a better idea of a concept through a drawing or a picture than through words.
But is there a specific concept that you think should be communicated in the informed consent about cure research or about what we've been talking about the science or about the risk or how to communicate the uncertainty, et cetera?
You know, I really think, and I was trying to read it when I was speaking before, but I really want to reiterate that you should say that there is no benefit here. Mm-hmm. You know, no immediate benefit, period. Because, I mean, people just don't know that.
And what words would you use?
There is no immediate benefit to you, you know. as results of participating in this study.
Okay.
But there might be an unknown benefit.
Right.
So you need to clarify that, you know, if that's
There
going
is
to be
no
the
no-
case.
Oops, can you turn on your mic? Yeah.
There is no known, put the word known in there. But I mean, you know, this amorphous, well, this may not, you know, I mean, people want to get cured. People want to do better. You know, I mean, I think that there's altruism and there's altruism. They want to do what's good for the group and themselves. So I think it's really got to be straightforward from Jump Street that guess what? You ain't getting cured if you get in this protocol.
Any other concrete things? Oh, Deb, do you want to follow up on that?
I was wondering also, what do you think about the whole title of this research, cure research? Should it be called something else, like reservoir elimination or something else? What do you think about that?
And we'll let anyone address this as well. So we'll start with David.
Word cure, it opens up a whole thing. I mean, take Facebook, any social media network over the last couple of weeks. Anybody that follows any of the listservs or anything, you know, all these stories break, and you know, people are talking about stopping taking their meds, and it's like, this is crazy. So I agree with you, Deborah, that perhaps we need to look at some other nomenclature in terms of, because I think, although those of us who work in the field and live with the disease certainly hope for a cure, we know that realistically, it's probably some time away. And I get discouraged every time somebody uses the C word, as David used earlier, that it gives people false hope. And you know, it's sort of like NSA secrets being let out or something, you know?
Can you follow up? Yes.
Just one point I wanted to make, and I was talking
can you
with
state your name,
David and Linda about this earlier, which is in the concept of cure. A lot of us, myself included, who actually participated in the pathogenesis study around 12 years ago, I think some of that data has actually contributed very much to where we are today. So that you know, concept of what that cure research is something much, much larger than I think than what we're talking about here. There doesn't necessarily need to be this treatment endpoint. So I think this is something that we've really been involved in for many, many years.
Can I just add that even the NIH has trouble with describing this, and there was a group of people that tried to assess how much funding was being put into the NIH for cure research. Well, the coding system for cure is specific to the word cure, but there could be a lot of other things like pathogenesis, vaccine trials, and so forth. So it's been even hard for the scientists to come up with a good word.
I do agree that if I hear the word cure and I'm in the community and potential for me to go into a trial that is cure related, I'm going to, whether I'm told there's a benefit, or not in an informed consent process, I'm going to be hoping that there's a cure at the end of that for me, that could result in that. So I think that is an important consideration and/or the way that's described.
And David, I'm also going to ask you to reflect on the survey that you did and maybe provide some of that perspective as well.
Sure. So the first thing I want to say is that I think it's, for me, I think it's a really hopeful sign of where we are socially in the epidemic that the C word can even be used. But when I'm talking about research and what I think is appropriate for research, I don't think it should be used at all. And if there's a term, I don't think any term is perfect, because with some of the gene therapies, we may not reach eradication of the reservoir, but they may still very well control the virus. But maybe reservoir depletion would be, because that is one of the goals, regardless of what we're doing. So I think that's a term that I think is safe to use. It's a little obscure, but it's safer to use, I think. And in terms of the studies, our partner Nelson and I are hoping to get funding to do a second study, and we want to do it with this time not on the cheap, and this time with some social scientists and some ethicists, trials experts, because we want to understand better how much the word motivates people and demotivates people, and maybe misrepresents what's going on. And we also want to really better understand in a very specific way how they understand and perceive risk in a meaningful way, not just in an abstract way. So I don't have a lot of data on terminology yet from the studies we've done, the study we did so far.
Let's go with Jeff, and then we'll go here.
Yeah, I mean, I think we shouldn't underestimate the amount of optimism that talking about the cure has provided the community, both the research community and then the people living with HIV. And it's really too late to turn back the clock on that. I think that's unrealistic. And I'm not really concerned about the individual trials, because none of these trials are going to be called, this is a cure trial. It's going to be, eradication or latency or, waking up the immune system. And it's not going to be described in those terms. So I don't really think there's a danger in that. And I think as long as the individual sites, when they're advertising these trials, are being ethical and not advertising it as cure research, but saying we're doing a trial about the immune system or something like that, it's going to be fine. So I don't think we need to tie ourselves in knots about this.
Okay. Go ahead.
I was just going to say I don't like
And can
the
you
cure
state
word
your-
at all.
state your
And
name?
Michael Dorsch, Treatment Education Network, Denver. So I don't like the cure thing. And just a really quick little anecdote. When the ACTG reformed and did the TSGs, and they always had the short names for everything, like in the old days, TRAD and OpMan and OpArt and all that. So they were coming up with the name for us, and the actual name of that cure TSG is not a cure TSG. It's HIV reservoirs and viral eradication. So I suggested, why don't we call it RAVE? Like this is the latest RAVE, reservoirs and viral eradication. Joe Aaron liked it. John Miller said, oh, that implies circuit parties and drugs. We can't call ourselves that. And then so now we're called the Cure TSG, and I think that's crazy.
If the cat's out of the bag with that cure business, I think there's no going back as far as, trying to get the word out to the community. And like everything, it's a double-edged sword. It has good things and bad things. And I mean, as I think Jeff says, if you do it like the collaboratories are divided, immunotherapy, gene therapy, eradication therapy, none of those does, they all mean a lot of different things too, but you could take the sensationalism out of it by using those kind of things. But I think the people are interested in cure.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, and then we'll come back to the yellow. Sure.
But I also think that if you went back and asked those poll questions and used, would you participate in a whatever study instead of a cure study, that the responses might be different.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Good point.
Hello, my name is Mabel Martin, and I'm thinking something more along the likes of HIV, virus, advanced target research. So to not as proclaim that there's going to be some kind of a cure, but to kind of make it seem more like it's more advanced research than what's available now. And also to piggyback on the informed consent, I think in creating an informed consent, it's important to allow the individual to understand that although they may not benefit directly from this research or participating in the research, that they will get satisfaction in knowing that them participating in the research will potentially help others.
So Sarah asked a question earlier that I'm going to revisit about who should be doing. Do you want to restate your question about should it be with the investigator or the person who should be? Well, you stated it better than I did.
So what I'm trying to drill down and understand better is what would be an ideal consent process so that we could really feel comfortable that we've allowed the potential participant to analyze the risks and the benefits and alternatives for himself or herself. And they've had the opportunity to ask the questions that they need to ask to understand that calculus for themselves. And that the investigator would, or whoever is doing the consent process, would have a sense that the participant understands what's being asked. And you started to touch on it a little bit by saying you think that there needs to be more time given to that process, and maybe it needs to be a multimodality process. But I'm wondering if you have more to say, and within, as you think about what that process would look like, if there are any other specifics. We've already heard that Linda say that we should really be very cut and dry, very clear, that it should say you will not get benefit from this trial if there are no projected benefits. But if there are other examples that you have for us about how to explain the risks or benefits, we would like to hear those too.
I wonder when Murray, and I think maybe Jeff talked about this earlier, I think human beings, if you worry about what's happening to you now and what you're going through now, and if you're suffering side effects now and maybe that'll go away and you don't want that to happen again, that's more of a reality than, okay, well, maybe you'll get cancer. Well, maybe I won't, that's more far away, and, well, we'll worry about that later. So I think if there's a way to, and I know a lot of informed consents that I've seen list what the risks of these other things are, but if you could put into perspective, if you could put in there definite information about what the percentages of, how many people does this happen to, and how many years from now, and it may be that, if I have a life-threatening disease, then I ain't going to worry about what's going to happen 20 years from now, So if you could be more definite about not only the risk, but what the real risk of that happening to you is. Does that make sense?
Can I follow up and say, how would you characterize uncertainty if you couldn't give as clear-cut numbers that you're looking for, that you as the person deciding to participate, if those numbers don't exist, how would you communicate the uncertainty about that?
You just have to say that. We've been doing phase 1 trials for 100, how many years have you guys been in existence? But there have been, phase 1 trials that do this all the time. So, I really think it's important to say we're uncertain about, I like really short sentences. Boom, 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 boom. And I think that's easier for people to read than some long, rolling sort of paragraph.
Celia.
And to add to that, uncertainty about what the risks are and how to quantify them, we're interested in communicating for some of our treatments that the treatments have perhaps an indefinite residence in the body. In other words, unlike the therapies that have been so far, under investigation or development, some of the ones in our office may last. So the risks may be lifetime risks. And that is a bit different, makes it a little less, well, it's something in the future, because sometimes I think people think, well, I'll withdraw the drug. And then after a certain period of time, that risk is not there, which I think is, often true. If you didn't have the risk in the short term, you may not get it in the longer term.
So there's
I think to the extent that is potentially happening, if you go off of a treatment and it's going to remain in your body as best you know, that has to be said so clearly up front, even though you may not know what the risks of that happening are. That's got to be really, those are the kinds of things that have to be explicitly stated, and then you can get into the kind of the mumbo jumbo that's necessary in order to achieve, true informed consent. But it's almost like there's a fact sheet with bullets that are really short and to the point that sort of lay out what the document itself is trying to tell you. When you go to sign all the papers at your mortgage company when you're buying a house. You're signing all kinds of crap that you don't know what it is, right? So if there was a cheat sheet that said, okay, Form 1 is going to tell you about this, and just in very simple language, that those kinds of things I think would be really helpful.
Linda, and then I'm going to, someone in the audience.
I think it was David.
Oh, David, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to give a process suggestion, and that's that, I mean, and you, I'm sure you know this better than I would know it, of course, but you're a decision-making scientist, but I think that how we pose the opportunity for a decision to people is so critically important. And I think if you simply say, do you have any more questions, you get one answer. I think even if you say, do you have any more questions, would you like some time to think about it, you get another answer. And I think if you say, I would suggest that you take some time to think about this, and we can talk about it again later if you have any more questions, gets you yet another answer. And so I know that the FDA can't mandate a process, but I think those kinds of processes could be really helpful to suggest to investigators.
Okay. We'll go to Tim. Oh, I'm sorry. And then Tim.
Hi, I'm Bob Monk from the AIDS InfoNet, and I've long been concerned about the patient consent process because there's no disinterested party or no third party involved. I've been to some investigator meetings that are like the most cheerleader kind of things you could imagine. You know, yay, you enrolled 34 at your site. Of course, your goal is 50. And there's a lot of pressure on these research nurses to produce. I don't know how it would be feasible, but to really, I like the idea of, would you like some time to think about it? We won't sign you up today, come back in a whatever. But I'm very concerned about that.
Okay, and then Tim, and then we'll go back.
I just wanted to go back to a point that David raised earlier in this session, which is I think he talked about really the concept of taking advantage of different technologies for informed consent. One such being video. We don't do that because there's a very famous literacy study that came out about 10 years ago that basically said that 10% of what is read is remembered versus around 30 to 40% of what is watched and heard is remembered. And we're not really just talking about providing an educated permission to participate in the study. We're also talking about getting people to remember why they participated, remember what the risks are, remember what the potential benefits are, and importantly, to remember what their rights are. So I think that we really have a very wide array of different technologies that we can take care of that we're really not talking about here.
Andy Cates. I think health literacy plays a really, really big role in this, because if informed consents are supposed to be written at the 8th grade level, is that 8th grade at an Ivy League prep school, 8th grade at an inner city school, 8th grade at a school on the border in El Paso, Texas? And to Tim's point, I think that videos are something that can transcend all of those grade qualities, if not levels. And certainly you can't have a video of every aspect of informed consent, but if you can show a video of procedures and maybe have interviews of people that have gone through those procedures, that have had good results, bad results, that can be very helpful. The other thing is one of the hurdles that I perceive is the community members that or research participants you would be looking for aren't necessarily the ones that have gotten the most education regarding research. So those of us that have volunteered our time to learn, to understand, to be able to speak to our peers in lay terms, we're in some ways cut out of that informed consent process due to HIPAA and other things. We can't go out and actively recruit for trials. We can't sit in, in the lobby of a research site and talk to people before they go in and meet with the study nurse. I'm not saying we shouldn't have privacy and confidentiality, but if the people that we're looking to get into research trials are those that are not necessarily in the know, they're newly infected, they're in acute infection, they're going through crazy thoughts in their head about their diagnosis, yet they're the ones that we'd really like to be able to study. How do they get reached? It seems like we need to kind of start earlier in the communities as a whole, in schools, and start to educate people, not just about HIV research, but research in general, and then have a mechanism that would allow those of us that are advocates to be able to reach them in a much more fruitful way.
We'll go down the row.
I'm going to tag again on what Tim was talking about in terms of a video. I don't know about where you all live, but where I live, when you get called for jury duty, you have to sit and watch this video. And it's very simple, it's very basic, it's aimed at anybody. And it tells you about the whole trial process and the defendant and all the rest of it. And you just sit there and you watch that, and then you kind of know a little bit more. And I don't know if you guys could do this, but I'm just wondering if the FDA could create a slick, tech, really good, slick, quick, maybe 5 minutes or less video just on cure research in general that's a requirement of anybody who's considering entering a clinical trial before they even get to the informed consent process. Something like that. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if IRBs would freak out on that. That's one thing to consider. When you look at the word informed consent, consent's easy. That's yes or no. You consent to let the guy in your lane when you're driving. Informed is information. It's informing. It's and we really need that more and more and more in this whole arena. At our pre-CROI Community Cure Workshop this year, we identified that educating and informing the community, our HIV community, about this whole field is crucial, and it's an unmet need right now, and we're currently trying to come up with ways to do that. There are national publications, videos, a number of other things, but I think it's really, really important, and I just lost my train of thought. It needs to happen. The informed consent process shouldn't start with the informed consent. I think it needs to start with before that information dissemination. And what I was going to say was a bunch of us put out all kinds of fires after those press releases, the Daily Telegraph, all that crap that was going on. I was getting emails. It was crazy what was going on. I mean, we all knew that Kate was pregnant before she was pregnant in this day and age,
I hear a recurring theme about needing to start earlier than actual informed consent, and my colleagues can echo on this. I think it needs to be reiterated that drug development is the FDA has a part in that. So I hope that there are other folks, hearing what you're saying. Does anyone want to comment on the theme of sort of general education about research? Not to put any of you on the spot.
It's not that, but I'm wondering, do you think there's any utility in, say, a post-test process where you go through the informed consent process and then you have a very brief, focused test that you take that covers the most salient points, covering the biggest risks that have to do with whatever this type of research is. And unless the person's able to pass that, say, on 1 or 2 attempts, you just feel like they're not getting these points and they're not going to be someone that really should be in that type of a trial.
This is a great question. In fact, we have a polling question on it. It's our final polling question. No, let's ask it now. This is great. We just need to get it set up, but it's directly to this point. Do you think it would be appropriate for HIV cure research study participants to take a post-test at the end of the informed consent process? Whether they understood important aspects of the study, its purpose, the benefit, the potential benefits and the potential risks. Did I get that right? Okay. Yes, okay. Yeah, Matt.
So I want to just say with a caveat, I mean, you don't want to call it, I don't think you should call it a test, number one. Call it a survey or whatever, that freaks people out. But also don't disqualify people, but you have them have another opportunity to learn the information so that you might be able to use them in the study.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if this was a requirement, I bet the docs would find a way to get somebody in there to actually explain what they were supposed to be knowing, right?
Oh, we have someone, okay.
Yeah, three things. One is that I certainly be far from me to say anything bad about video. I love it. But I think it's important to get the nice thing about a video is you can custom make it for the culturally and ethnically specific and languages, etc. So it makes it really a by and for the people that it needs to address and work with. The other one is that I think it's really important to consider families who that person feels is important in their decision-making process and make sure that happens, because I've heard, I don't know how many meetings like this where people said, well, they were pulled from the trial by their husband or who went outraged that they were in this trial in the first place. So, I mean, I think it's important to have that discussion as a part of the process before they get into the informed consent.
I just want to note really quickly that I think that there are a couple ways you can do that kind of an assessment, and I would call it an assessment and not a test. And I think that one of the ways you can do that is verbally, and you can ask people to explain in their own understanding what they know, what they think they heard about X, Y, or Z. So I think that's important.
Also, I just want to point out, and maybe Richard Klein wants to speak to this a little bit more, but FDA does have resources about clinical trial research and what it means to be in a clinical trial. So, I mean, it's a starting point, but I take your point that maybe us or other groups can do something more specific to these issues. But we do have some sort of education system in place already.
Thanks for clarifying. We'll go to David.
I'm just curious, one of the models that's really worked well on the care side is the use of peer navigators and the possibility of using somebody to do the informed consent who's been through a trial before. I think you sort of alluded to it when you said, using people that have been in the video, I did this and, so on and so forth. But I think that may be a better way to engage people to get into trials, but also keeping them in. That you also have some sort of peer support system that once they're in a trial, to keep them engaged in the trial. It's been very successful in the Ryan White care system for keeping people in care and engaged in care, and I think it's the same sort of principle with research.
Marie?
I recently heard a presentation of a doctor in Denver that had done some tremendous work related to linkages to care and keeping patients in care. And I think this could be applicable. They did, on the initial arrival of the patient to the clinic, they had a kiosk where they were asked a series of questions related to substance use and homelessness and kinds of things that a doctor might not either be comfortable talking with the patient about or have time to or whatever, but it was an anonymous kind of way of getting some input from that patient early in the process of an entire visit. And they showed some incredible outcomes as a result of that. So I'm wondering if there could be some things like that could be built into an informed consent process, either on a tablet where you answered some questions and then came back later and the conclusion was another set of questions, and that could be a pre and post test to really kind of see where you're going, but it's not called that. You think you're interacting with the whole process that way.
Could you include that in the docket? If you write to the docket,
Sure.
include that in there.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to do a time check We are at 4:35, which is, according to the agenda, the end of the large group facilitated discussion, but we don't have any public comment signed up. Am I correct in that? Okay. So we are shaving some time off. So I think that given that it's a Friday afternoon in June, and I'm thinking it's gorgeous outside, I think we can cut the meeting a little bit short and still make sure that we have gotten done with all the questions and all the points that we want to make. So we will, my suggestion is that we can try to close out and see if FDA has any further questions. And then if you have any remarks that you want to make, we'll do that. And then we'll ask Teresa Mullen to come up. And between this and Teresa, we'll have if there's any web comments, we'll summarize those. So if you're on the web, this is your sort of final chance. We can't promise that we'll review all of them, but if you have something that's really different than what you've heard said here today, you can include that. Okay?
Sarah, before we leave this,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know, I feel like we really haven't done justice to this informed consent thing. I mean, I think it's broken the way it is now, and I think we've been around the rosy, but I wonder if there's anything else we could do to work with Sarah directly to convene something to talk about this, just this one aspect a little bit more, to make some recommendations or something. I don't know. I'm not sure what you are allowed to do and what's within your purview as far as the informed consent process is, but you know, I think of all the things that we've talked about today, this might be the most important, and I think we've probably given you the least concrete information.
Hi. If I could make a quick comment, if you know, what we could do is put together a webinar through my office and continue a conversation that way, if that works for you. So I can work with Linda.
That would be great. And the other thing I was going to say is that FDA is developing a guidance on informed consent. And when it is published, it's going to be published in draft. And we would welcome comments to our public docket that can be as detailed as you would like, and they will all be carefully considered. But before we close, I don't want to stand I don't want to stand in between us and a beautiful day, but I did want to see if anyone had any more specific comments about how we could sort of chip away at this idea of the therapeutic misconception, whether there are any suggestions about how people can understand that they're enrolling in research that's not going to be designed to treat them specifically, but is that the care they get is going to be protocol driven.
There are no known medical benefits to you participating in this trial.
I think
you just have to. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, just really quickly, I think one thing that we can do with these studies is to be abundantly clear that the therapies that are being prescribed or a treatment interruption that is being conducted is not consistent with the federal guidelines on treatment for people living with HIV. And I think that should be in every consent form, only because it's true. And recommended medical practice is one thing, and research is another. And I think making that very clear in a consent process is important. It might dissuade some people from participating, but you know what? That's great, because if they understand that and they don't want to participate, it's good that we knew that, you know.
Marie, do you have?
I'm thinking to the some of the vaccine trials and some of the vaccine research that's going on. There has to I know that there are portions of studies that don't really result in any benefit, and I'm just wondering if there's any messages that can be borrowed from that process, because I know they've done a lot of work on making sure that the messages are clear about we're not developing a vaccine, you're not getting vaccinated, and this is not going to protect you from getting HIV.
What about informing? Is there any concrete perspective that you have on how to inform about having to stop the medications and the risks that could be associated with it? I don't think we've talked about that at all yet, on how to communicate that.
I think it's sort of what David just said, that, you know, this is not consistent with, you know, U.S. Public Health Service recommendations. You know, there could be risks that we don't know what these are, and it has to just be as clear and as simple as what Linda and David were talking about.
Kids, don't try this at home.
Well, and I think also it depends on the population that you're studying. I think if it's people who have CD4 counts in the 750 range, and they happen to already be on therapy, that's one kind of consent process. If someone had a CD4 nadir of 50 and they currently have a CD4 count of 350, so it's technically above the range of the SMART study, they need to really understand that SMART study and what the results of it were.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We had Robert, and then someone, okay then.
I want to thank all of you from the FDA that are here for all your hard work. I'm wondering if you could just comment generally about the sequester and what effects it's going to have on your funding and what your plans are of the constriction that might come for your research.
Don't quote me. I mean, what the impact we've felt to date has been basically that our travel has been limited, but we've still been allowed to hire new reviewers, and we're fortunate that we are able to hire. Not large numbers, but what we feel at this point are enough to get our jobs accomplished. And as far as we know, there won't be any furloughs of FDA employees. And I will be honest with you, it has had an impact on morale overall in general. But I think we're all grateful that we're able to come to work, we have a job, and we have a meaningful job. So I guess in the end, it hasn't really directly affected us as it has perhaps some other agencies. But we're still continuing to do the work that we are asked to do by the public.
Deb, in that travel can be a big thing, though. I mean, you don't get to go to research meetings where the data is presented, where you can interact with researchers in industry.
Right.
I mean, that's a really important thing.
You're right.
It's not like you're going to Paris, right?
No, we haven't been to Paris in a long time. But we do participate in webinars, and we go to local AIDS and hepatitis meetings, and we give our talks on the phone to large groups. Kim just did one on long-acting therapies, and others have done similar presentations via phone. You're right, though. It's not the same as being at the meeting, networking, etc.
And there may also be some new activities, some new planned. Yeah, there may also be some new activities or some additional planned activities that either may be difficult to get to, may take more time to get to, or that we simply just have to wait before we tackle them based on the current prioritization of activities. So, and that really just is in essence common sense with regards to when you're facing a situation where there are limitations on the resources or resources that you thought might be there aren't present. So. So that's probably getting beyond the scope of what we can cover here today. But
I'll do the ground rule check that we are kind of focusing on the questions that were being asked, but a fair question. We'll go here.
I'm tagging on, I think, what David was saying, that it really needs to be specific to whatever in terms of the interruption and the informed consent. For example, if somebody's taking efavirenz, there's a whole protocol for how you interrupt that therapy. You just don't stop it like all at once, and that needs to be conveyed. And again, it's some people really get it and some people really don't. So that can be a very tough thing. And then general education again. I know a young guy in his 20s, just infected a couple of years ago. He acquired a resistant virus, and so they had to adjust his regimen or whatever. So now he's on a specific regimen. He knows that, and he wants to do the Sangamo zinc finger trial, heterozygous Delta 32, and he's like, oh, I can't interrupt because I have this resistant virus. Well, really, couldn't he interrupt if it works? We don't know. We know and we don't know, but that's part of this whole information thing that really has to happen before the informed consent and definitely be a part of that for that individual.
Anything else from up here? Adam?
A couple of questions that I had jotted down. From your perspective, I'm sorry, can you hear? Is there a threshold that you feel the FDA shouldn't allow a study to go forward based on the safety risks that may be inherent in the trial? Or should it always be up to the patient via the informed consent process to make that determination? And if you do believe that there's a safety threshold, where do you think that exists? Where would you draw the line if you were on this side of the table, if you think that that's our role?
I mean, personally, I get uncomfortable with treatment interruptions with anything below 500 as a CD4 count, just personally. I would prefer that we don't allow people with high Framingham risk scores to enter these studies. I just think, why do that to people? And I think also that, we probably are going to have to talk about some treatment interruptions that are longer than 16 weeks at some point. And I think we need to start thinking about that, just because there may be therapies where the stopping rule is that your CD4 count falls below 500 or your viral load climbs back up above 50. And if someone hasn't met that stopping rule, should they be allowed to continue on their treatment interruption, and what might that tell us scientifically? So I think those are the things that I think about when it comes to treatment interruptions.
Besides the population that you'd be choosing, as far as choosing the safest population, are there any particular risks inherent to the drugs that might be used, or the genetic manipulation that you think would be something that we shouldn't allow to go forward? Or do you think that should also be up to the patient to make that decision?
It depends on if it's been 4 people and 3 of them died. I mean, it's kind of, you have to be give us a little bit more information about. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times the problem is that the medications that are being used, of course, they weren't approved for that population, so it's hard to gauge some of the risks, even the risks that are known for the drugs, let alone the theoretical risks. So that's always the difficulty. I was just curious from the patient's perspective, where do you kind of draw the line where you think this much risk is too much risk for us to even, if you were on our side of the table, for us to even let it go forward as a study?
I mean, I think if you can always do more animal studies, I think that's always good to do, because where it will give us information, I know it won't always give us that information. And I know you can't always do that with gene therapies, but I think that's really important. I think, like the Verinostat study is, I think, a perfect example where you had a drug that was Ames positive, and, so there's a theoretical risk of cancer, but you were only giving them a single dose. It was a small dose. And you didn't see risks of cancer in the cancer, additional cancers in the cancer studies. So I think that was a reasonable go decision to make. So I think it's hard to say it in the theoretical, because it really depends on the therapy that you're looking at. I think it's important that, though, but I think there are 2 other important things about studies. One is that I think it's not always just about the safety of the drug, it's about the trial design. And I think we have a real obligation, if we're going to ask people to donate their bodies and lives to these things, to make sure that the trial is designed to get as best as it can to get the answer that you're going for. And I think a perfect example of that, and we were talking about it earlier today in a different meeting, are the assays that you use to determine latency. The Silicano study came out and said that there was absolutely no correlation between 6 different assays. And so what do you do about that? Well, maybe you require that they have to do 3, 3 different ones to prove that you've done something to the reservoir. I don't know, but I think that there are things you can do cleverly to manage and mitigate risk.
And I think David gives you a perfect example about Verinostat, and now we're in a position to, well, how many doses can we do now, and to look at, and 23, 25, and to do that safely. But, I mean, the way things are, we don't know a lot of the answers. So us doing it in a stepwise fashion like you've been doing, I think, is all you can do.
Can I interrupt with a real process question? Can we collect the clickers so that we can let Chad go home? I think we should give Chad a round of applause for helping us with this. Okay, now we can continue.
So In regard to this question, I don't want to sound naive in saying this, but I just in working on the DARE cab with UCSF and some of the researchers in Australia, I know they're being extremely careful about moving forward in the trials that they're doing. And you don't want to completely rely on that, obviously, but it's moving very slowly in terms of some of these riskier procedures and drugs being used so far. And that may be because of you guys, but it's true. I think they're really being, and some of the biotechs are too, others aren't.
Anything else? Okay, yes, go, Jeff.
Well, and I think most of these processes have already been in place for a long time to ensure patient safety, and I think we need to rest assured that they are in place, and that, as everybody said, evaluate each therapy as it comes up. But on the other hand, I hate to see us become overly paternalistic to patients and not let them make decisions. Because these are their lives, and they're allowed to make that decision. So there needs to be a balance.
Okay, with that, I think we'll call the facilitated discussion closed, and my job's almost done, and the panel members' jobs are almost done. As Teresa is making her way up to the front, I'm going to ask Andrea just to see if there are any web remarks.
There were actually quite a few comments on the webcast, and I apologize, I won't be able to summarize all of them, so just bear with me as I sift through them. We have some comments based on our earlier discussion about clinical trials and the case of a trial that shows therapeutic benefit in an immunologic non-responder with a doubling of T cells. And the comment asks, how can the FDA help provide a clear pathway for further development of the therapy? We also have a comment about incentivizing patients to take part in cure research in clinical trials. I think that's a new thought. That it might be a standard and often necessary practice, but would patients be willing to take more of a risk if they received an incentive or medical care during a cure trial? And then a few other comments about the informed consent process. One comment echoes what we heard about education, especially those on the front line, i.e. the research coordination staff, because of the lack of time on the part of principal investigators. And also echoing the comments about videos with pre and post testing, and also a suggestion about study participants taking part in half-day or full-day training at a local ASO or health department. Finally, we have a few comments. Someone commented it might be interesting to the community that there is a generic drug regulatory science initiatives public meeting that the FDA is holding on June 21st about the public discussion of agency generic drug research priorities and an overview of current efforts. And then finally, we have someone else who commented that maybe an HIV 101 document would be helpful, a long legal 20-pager and then a short 2-pager that is really for the patient. Those are just a few of our comments.
All right, with that, I will thank the panel members, and I'll thank the folks in the audience and the folks on the web. I think this has been some great input. I've learned a lot today. I think Teresa is going to probably echo my comments. And with that, I will turn it over to Teresa Mullen, to give the closing remarks, and then we'll be done.
Okay, well, I guess I really am the last thing between you and a beautiful weekend, so let me try to finish up. And I want to thank you so much also for coming here to this meeting and giving us the benefit of your very thoughtful perspectives, a lot of great ideas. I took, and I'm not even a transcriptionist, and I took 21 pages of notes, so I'm going to spare you most of my notes, but on the other hand, I mean, I want to sort of say a little bit of what I took away from what we heard today. And so on the patient perspectives, on current approaches, just hearing about the critical importance of paying attention to comorbidities and of including people in trials who really are like the real population that has HIV, and also considering the drug-drug interactions for those drugs that you have to take to treat the comorbidities. The adherence to your regimen and changes in the regimen and the concerns about changing the regimen
trying to find ways to ease administration, and concerns that no more drugs in the same class might be getting developed, and so there may be fewer options going forward for new therapies in those classes, the same NME class. And the special challenges we heard earlier for maybe the pediatric populations, because there are various age segments and times when people become HIV positive, the prospect of having the rest of your life on therapy, and the earlier age at which you experience the side effects from those therapies, and things just like night terrors, which are also harder for young children probably, or children to have to contend with. And then in terms of perspectives on cure research, I mean, I think we heard that one thing I clearly heard is that you're not making this participation decision from the same perspective that patients made it when the epidemic began. You're at a very different place, and available therapies that work, they work pretty well. You're looking at potential loss of what you have from that therapy, so you're at a very different place in terms of prospect and looking at the risks, and that just has to be understood. And it was also confirmed by the clicker input that about half said they would not be interested in that and in participating in this kind of research, and that we'd have to be much clearer about what the benefits are. In fact, the point was made by many of you that we have to be very clear, or the sponsor, the clinical investigator needs to be very clear about what the specific risks and benefits the patient would be exposed to. And you need to really understand exactly what is entailed in the trial protocol, what are you going to experience, what specific benefits, if any, and the more clear and quantitative and simple we can be, and that can be in being presented, simple but not simplistic, the better, to help really get that, achieve that. And that there might be specific benefits that different folks mentioned. Money may be something that some will want to include in their calculus of whether or not they want to participate. High quality care, access to high quality care that they might not otherwise have, and of course clinical benefits if there are any. And that you made the point, I think repeatedly, that this is a very individual decision, and that the individual's perspective has to be reflected. And another observation that came after that, I think, was that there are critical subpopulations that are not here today, that the young and maybe minority populations are not here, women populations are not here, and that their perspectives are going to be critical to take into account. So all of that about what people need to understand to see whether or not they even are willing to participate in this kind of cure research led us very, I think, nicely to the informed consent process discussion. And the point was made, at least that I heard, that paper forms today, they're often long, they're not clear, they're not particularly quantified or helpful, that people don't necessarily even go through a careful reading, let alone understanding of them. And the process today may be a little bit motivated toward enrollment, and the parties involved are not disinterested, and that makes things more challenging for a good process. And it's not clear that people understand already, what does cure research mean? That might not even be a good name for it. We spent a while talking about maybe that name's misleading, and how to talk about the benefits, and there may not be any, to being in these trials. You talked about the potential value of video and visual presentation and how that might be better understood. At least, I think you're saying providing background on what this sort of research is about, maybe general information about